You have to shake the bottle before using, for sulfur will not dissolve. मतलब कुछ sulfur होता है उसमें dissolve नहीं होता. In Dry Valley, saturated a small sponge with the liquid and rubbed it carefully into the roots of his hair. मतलब वो liquid से roots होते हैं. मैं शायद काले कर रहा हूँ. Besides sulfur, there was sugar of lead in it and tincture of Nux vomica and Bayram. कुछ होगा वो लोग अपना काला करने के लिए हेयर कलरिंग करने के लिए करते होंगे. Dry Valley found the recipe in a Sunday newspaper. You must next be told why a strong man came to fall a victim to a beauty hint. बताइए दो बारी में करेंगे. नहीं क्यों सुंदर क्यों बनना चाह रहा है. Dry Valley had been a sheepman. एक sheepman था वो कहता था. His real name was Hector, but he had been rechristened after his range to distinguish him from the Elm Cream Jackson who ran sheep further down the Frio. Many years of living face to face with the sheep on their own terms wearied Dry Valley Johnson. So he sold his ranch for $18,000 and moved to Santa Rosa to live a life of gentlemanly case. मतलब वो गया उसने अपने बड़ी सी रैंच ले ली आराम से रहने लगा शीप को करने लगा. Being a silent and melancholy person of 35 or perhaps 38, he soon became that cursed earth-cumbering thing, an elderly bachelor with a hobby. एक बैचलर है मतलब उसकी शादी वादी कुछ नहीं हुई थी 38 वगैरह पे उसकी कुछ हॉबी थी. Someone gave him the first strawberry to eat and he was done for. उसको स्ट्रॉबेरी खिलाई तो उसने कहा मैं स्ट्रॉबेरी जो है मैं वो खाऊंगा. Dry Valley bought a 4-room cottage in the village and a library of strawberry culture. 4-room cottage या strawberry culture. Behind the cottage was a garden of which he made a strawberry patch. कौन सा strawberry का patch ना. In his old grey woolen shirt, his brown duck trousers and high-heeled boots, he sprawled all day on a canvas caught under a live oak tree at his back door, studying the history of the seductive scarlet berry. वो पूरे टाइम पर स्ट्रॉबेरी सोचता रहता था बस ये मान लो. The school teacher, Miss David, spoke of him as a fine, presentable man for his middle age, but the focus of Dry Valley's eyes embraced no woman. वो मतलब नहीं था उसको स्ट्रॉबेरी में था. They were mainly blinks who flew skirts as a signal for him to lift awkwardly his heavy round-crowned, broad-brimmed felt Stetson whenever he met them. उसको औरतों में कोई इंटरेस्ट नहीं उसको केवल स्ट्रॉबेरीज में था और उसे था. And then hurry past to get back to his beloved berries. उसको berries ही पसंद थी औरतें तो बस एक ऐसा distraction था. And all this recitative by the chorus is to only bring us to the point where you may be told why Dry Valley shook up the insoluble sulfur in the bottle. So long drawn and inconsequential a thing is history, the anamorphous shadow of a milestone reaching down the road between us and the setting sun. When his strawberries were beginning to ripen, Dry Valley bought the heaviest buggy whip and Santa Rosa close. उसने ripen हो नहीं तो उसने एक heavy buggy जो थी whip जो थी this thing. He sat for many hours under the light oak tree, plaiting and weaving in an extension to its lash. When it was done, he could snip a leaf from a bush 20 feet away with the cracker. For the bright, predictory eyes of Santa Rosa youth were watching the ripening berries, and Dry Valley was arming himself against their expected raids. अब स्ट्रॉबेरी बढ़ने लगी तो लोगों की आंखें वो थी कि भैया उसको लेंगे और ड्राई वैली ने एक विप बनाई ताकि बेटा आओ मैं तुम्हें मारूंगा ऐसा था. No greater care had he taken of his tender lambs during the ranching days than he did of the cherished fruits. मतलब लैम्स का भी उतना ख्याल नहीं रखा जितने वो फ्रूट्स के किए. Warning it from hungry wolves that whistled and howled and shot their marbles and peered through the fence that surrounded his property. In the house next to Dry Valleys lived a widow with a pack of children that gave the husbandman frequent anxious misgivings. अब उसकी जो एक नेबर थी उसमें एक विडो रहती थी और ड्राई वैली को उसके बच्चों से बहुत डर लगता था. In the woman there was a strain of Spanish. She had wedded one of the name of O'Brien. Dry Valley was a connoisseur in cross strains and he foresaw troubles in the offspring of this Indian. मतलब उसको लगा अरे यार एक अंग्रेज ने स्पेनिश सीखी है ये बच्चे बड़े बदमाश होंगे पता कुछ गड़बड़ी होगा. In the between the two homesteads ran a crazy picket fence overgrown with morning glory and wild gourd vines. You know? Often he could see little heads with mops of black hair, flashing dark eyes, dodging in and out between the pickets, keeping tabs on the reddening berries. देखता था पीछे से उसकी जो वाइन थी उसमें बच्चे जो थे उनके वो टक 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 देखते रहते थे ब्लैक हेड. Late one afternoon, Dry Valley went to the post office. When he came back, like Mother Hubbard, he found the dues to pay. The descendants of the Iberian bandits and Iberian cattle, Iberian bandits, Iberian cattle raiders had swooped down on his no बदमाश जो थे उसके स्ट्रॉबेरी पैच में घुस गए थे. To the outraged vision of Dry Valley, there seemed to be a sheep corral full of them. ये जानवर जो थे वो पूरा का पूरा यहाँ पे आ गए. Perhaps they numbered 5 or 6, 5 या 6 शैतान जो है अंदर आ गए. वो कौन वो बच्चे हैं बच्चे. Between the rows of green plants, they were stooped, hopping about like toads, gobbling silently and voraciously his finest fruits. उसके अच्छे फ्रूट जो थे वो ले रहे थे. Dry Valley slipped into the house, got his whip and charged at the marauder. उसने कहा whip लेकर के इनको मारा जाए. The lash curled about the legs of the nearest, a greedy 10-year-old. और लगा उसने whip मारी और एक शैतान बच्चा जो कि 10 साल का था उसको लगी. Before they knew, they were discovered. His shriek gave the warning and the flock scampered for the fence like a drove of javelins flushed in the chaparral. Dry Valley's whip drew a toll of 2 more elephant shrieks before they dived through the vine-clad fence and disappeared. Dry Valley, less fleet, followed them nearly to the pickets. Checking his useless pursuit, he rounded a bush, dropped his whip, and stood voiceless, motionless, the capacity of his power consumed by the act of breathing and preserving the perpendicular. Behind the bush stood Panchita O'Brien. अब जहाँ पे वो रुका वहाँ पे एक बुश थी और उसके पीछे एक लड़की थी पैंचेता ओब्रायन. Scorning to fly. She was 19, the oldest of the raiders. और सबसे बड़ी थी वो 19 साल की oldest of the raiders. Her night black hair was gathered back in a wild mass and tied with a scarlet ribbon. She stood with reluctant feet, yet nearer the brook than to the river. For childhood had environed and detained her. She looked at Dry Valley Johnson for a moment with magnificent insolence. And before his eyes slowly crushed a luscious berry. मतलब insolence का मतलब जैसे कि मैं तुमसे डरती नहीं हूँ. And before his eyes slowly crushed a luscious berry between a white teeth. और उसकी आंखों के सामने उसने एक बेरी खा ली दांत के सामने. Then she turned and walked slowly to the fence with a swaying, conscious motion such as a duchess might make use of leading a promenade. There she turned again and grilled Dry Valley Johnson once more in the dark flame of her audacious eyes, laughed a trifle schoolgirlishly, and twisted herself with pantherish quickness between the pickets to O'Brien's side of the white gold ring. और ऐसे झूमते झामते जो थी वो निकल गया. ड्राई वैली देखता रह गया. Dry Valley picked up his whip and went to his house. He stumbled as he went up the wooden step. The old Mexican woman who cooked his meals and swept his house called him to supper as he went through the rooms. अब वो रूम्स के थ्रू में गया और उसके लिए एक मैक्सिकन औरत खाना बनाती थी तो उसने देखा. Dry Valley went on, stumbled down the front steps, out the gate, and down the road into the mosquito thicket at the edge of the town. He sat down in the grass and laboriously plucked the spines from a prickly pear one by one. This was his attitude or thought acquired in the days when his problems were only those of the wind, wool and the water. अब वो sheepman था, उसकी जो simple सी आदत थी, तो जा करके वो कहीं बैठ गया और उसने वो किया. A thing that had happened to the man, a thing that, if you're eligible, you must pray that you may pass by. He had become enveloped in the Indian summer of the soul. उसको वो लड़की बहुत पसंद आ गई थी. Dry Valley had had no youth. उसका कोई youth नहीं था. Even his childhood had been a one of dignity and seriousness. At 6, he had viewed the frivolous grumbles of the lambs on his father's ranch with silent disapproval. अब वो इतनी सीरियस लाइफ थी कि 6 साल पे था, उसको लगता था कि अच्छा ये लैब्स भी अगर खेल रहे हैं तो कुछ प्रॉब्लम है। मतलब उसकी लाइफ बहुत सीरियस थी, शादी वादी भी नहीं हुई थी. His life as a young man had been wasted. The divine fires and impulses, the glorious exaltations and despairs, and the glow and the enchantment of youth had passed above his head. Never a thrill of Romeo had he known. He was but a melancholy jackass of the forest, with a ruder philosophy, lacking the bitter-sweet flavor of experience that tempered the veteran years of the rugged guard ranger of ardor. अब वो मतलब बहुत ही उसकी rugged life सी थी बचपन से. And now in his sere and yellow leaf one scornful look from the eyes of Panchata O'Brien had flooded the autumnal landscape with a tardy and delusive summer heat. But the sheepman was a hardy animal. Dry Valley Johnson had weathered too many northers to turn his back on a late summer spiritual allure. Old, he would show them. By the next mail went an order to San Antonio for an outfit of the latest clothes, colors and styles and prices no object. अब उसने अपने जो थे नए कपड़े वपड़े सब मंगाए कि मैं जो हूँ अच्छा दिखूंगा. अम्मा सुन रही हो? क्या हुआ अम्मा? अम्मा सो गई? अम्मा क्या हुआ? सो गई? The next day went the recipe for the hair restorer clipped from a newspaper, and for Dry Valley's sunburned auburn hair was beginning to turn silvery above his eyes. सब काला करना है और सब ठीक करने का. Dry Valley kept indoors closely for a week except for frequent sallies after youthful strawberry snatchers. Then a few days later he suddenly emerged brilliantly radiant in the hectic glow of his belated midsummer madness. A J bluebird tennis suit covered him outwardly, almost as far as his wrist and his ankles. His shirt was ox blood, his collar veined and tall, his necktie a floating oriflamme, his shoes bright tan, pointed and shaped on penitential lace. The little flat straw hat with a striped band desecrated his weather-beaten hair. Lemon-colored kid glass protected his oak tough hands from the benignant May sunshine. The sad and optic-smitting creature tittered out of his den, smiling foolishly and smoothing its glass for men and angels to see. अब वो एकदम स्टाइलिश रूप में बाहर आया कि देखो दुनिया को मैं कैसा. अम्मा बंद करें? सो गई. चलो कल पढ़ेंगे. सो जाओ सो जाओ. मजा लग रही है. नहीं हम 10 मिनट टाइम बंद करके हमें सो जाओ माँ सो जाओ. तबीयत ठीक नहीं वो तो अच्छी लग रही है तो मामा बट ये अभी तुम्हें क्या सोना है क्या? जैसे 3 पेज हैं. अच्छा है और क्या जब किया रहता है. ठीक है तो अभी करना है कि नहीं करना है? पढ़ लो 10 मिनट और पढ़ लो. To such a pass had Dry Valley Johnson been brought by Cupid, who always shoots game that is out of season with an arrow from a quiver of Momus. Reconstructing mythology, he had risen, a prismatic macaw, from the ashes of the grey-brown phoenix that had folded its tired wings to roost under the trees of Santa Rosa. Dry Valley paused in the street to allow Santa Rosans within the sight of him to be stunned, and then deliberately and slowly as his shoes required, entered Mrs. O'Brien's gate. Mrs. O'Brien के गेट में गया और सब लोग उसको देख के एकदम धक हो गए थे. Not until 11th month draw did Santa Rosa cease talking about Dry Valley Johnson's courtship of Panchata O'Brien. अब सब लोग जो थे उसके बात करते. It was an unclassifiable procedure, something like a combination of cakewalking, deaf and dumb oratory, postage stamp flirtation, and parlor charades. It lasted 2 weeks and then came to a sudden end. कल पढ़ेंगे. Okay.